Good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, everybody out there in the world of the Storytelling Cafe. My name's Gary Cordingley and I'm a storyteller living in Falmouth in Cornwall in the UK. And I'm very, very privileged and happy to be here to tell you some stories this afternoon or this evening or whatever time it is of the day, wherever you're living. Thank you for joining me. And thank you also to Dave Tong from the World Storytelling Cafe for asking me to record this little set. And thank you to the World Storytelling Cafe for organising themselves so quickly in response to the current crisis and getting the whole Storytelling Cafe up and running and bringing us together as an audience and caravan of storytellers, I guess. So these are indeed strange and difficult times. And I hope that with all my heart, I hope that wherever you are in the world, that you and your loved ones and those around you are staying safe and well, and hopefully we'll get through this very quickly. Now, where I live, I'm very, very privileged to be close to the sea, and within walking distance is this beautiful, beautiful scenery that I show you now. And so I incorporated into my exercise, my daily exercise, bringing my djembe and my camera and my stand down here to this little bit of the coast so that I can record my stories for you. I have to say, here in Britain, for better or worse, we are still able to go out and be in the outside and wander around. We just have to keep a 2-meter distance between ourselves and anybody else. We're allowed to go out once a day to do a little bit of exercise, and I'm so lucky because I have this in the place where I live, and I understand that a lot of people haven't. But I'm not going to dwell too much on all of that. Hopefully we'll be out of this soon and getting on with our lives. But because the sea is just here and I'm looking at it as I tell my story to you, I thought maybe I'd start my set with a little story that I once heard Taffy Thomas, the great storyteller from Britain, tell many, many years ago, and I very, very quickly picked that up and put it into my routine, especially when telling stories to young children. So this is a story for our younger audience, and you can join in with me, and I encourage you to do so at the right times. So it's about Jack. And when Jack was older, and he was married, and him and his wife, they lived in an old ramshackle shack at the edge of the sea. And do you know what? If a strong wind had blown in the night, it would have knocked that old shack over. Now, Jack was a fisherman, and every morning he would get up. Well, actually, he wouldn't even get up. He would just open the curtains, look out the window, and if he saw some clouds in the sky, he'd say to his wife, "There's too many clouds in the sky today. I can't possibly go fishing." And he'd roll over and he'd go back to sleep. And then he might open the curtains the next day and find that there's no clouds in the sky, and he'd turn to his wife and say, "I can't possibly go fishing today. There's not enough clouds in the sky." And he'd roll over and he'd go back to sleep. And fair enough, one day his wife said to him, "Jack, you're a lazy lump. Get out there and catch us some fish, and catch enough fish that we can take some to market and sell them and turn them into a bag of gold." So Jack got up and he put on his hat, and he put on his coat, and he went down to the beach and he climbed into his boat and he sailed out to sea. Now, when he got halfway out to sea, he picked up his net, and you can pick up your net with me, and he threw it. Ready? After 3, 1, 2, 3, swoosh! He threw that net out into the sea, and then he pulled it back in again. And when he pulled the net in and laid it out on the bottom of his boat, well, there in the net was an enormous fish. Now, if you're a fisherman and you've caught a fish and you're either going to eat it or sell it at market, the kindest thing you can do to that fish is kill it quickly. So the fishermen often have a hammer on board. Now, Taffy calls this hammer the priest. I call it the hammer. And he reached for the hammer and he went to hit the fish and kill it quickly with the hammer when the fish called out and said, "No, Jack, you don't want to do that. Today's your lucky day. You caught me, a magic talking fish. And if you spare my life, I'll grant you a wish." So Jack said, "Well, I wish that I had a bag of gold." And the fish said, "Well, if that's all you want, then just put me back in the sea." So Jack picked up the fish and he put it back in the sea and he watched it swim away. And then he thought, what what a silly man I am, letting that big fish get away like that. And he went to sit down on his bench, and when he sat down, oh, there was a lump there, and when he turned around and looked, there was a little leather sack. And he picked up that leather sack, and it was quite heavy, and when he opened it and looked inside, what was in there, do you think? Yeah, of course, gold. So he sailed back to the beach, and he walked along the beach towards his old ramshackle shack, and there was his wife stood at the door, and she said, "Jack, you haven't been out there long enough yet to get enough fish to..." And he said, "Don't you worry about that." He said, "Come inside and look at this." They went into the shack, and he put the bag of gold on the table, and the two of them looked in, and Jack's wife said, "Jack, you've done well. You've done very well." And she was happy. How long do you think she was happy for? A day? A week? A month? No. An hour. And that wasn't because she was a bad woman, and that wasn't because she was a greedy woman. It was just because she got to thinking about what had just happened. And so she thought about Jack going out there and catching that big fish, and she called him in and she said, "Jack, this morning you caught a big magic talking fish, and he gave you a wish, and all you wished for was this bag of gold, when actually you could have wished for a nice townhouse with iron gates and lots of rooms and servants coming and going, and for me to have a beautiful frock, and for you to have a lovely suit." And Jack said, "Well, I never thought about that." And his wife said, "Well, you get up tomorrow morning and you go out and you catch that fish and you make that wish." So the next morning, Jack got up and he put on his hat and he put on his coat and he went down to the beach and climbed into his boat and he sailed out to sea. When he got halfway out to sea, he picked up his net, and you can pick up his net with me. Ready? And after 3, 1, 2, 3, swoosh! He threw it over the side and then pulled it back in again. You can pull it back in. When he pulled it back in, there, lying in the bottom of the net, in the bottom of his boat was, you guessed it, the fish. Now Jack reached back to pick up the hammer and hit the fish and kill it, when the fish called out and said, what did he say? "No, Jack, you don't want to do that. Today's your lucky day. Today you caught me, the magic talking fish, and if you spare me my life, I'll grant you a wish." So Jack said, "I wish that me and my wife lived in a beautiful townhouse with iron gates and lots of rooms and servants coming and going, and I wish that she had a nice frock and I had a lovely suit." And the fish said, "Well, if that's all you want, just put me back in the sea." So Jack picked up the fish and he put it back in the sea and he watched it swim away. And then he sailed back to the beach and he climbed out of his boat and he walked along the beach, and there, where his old ramshackle shack had been, in its place was a beautiful townhouse. Indeed, had lots and lots of rooms and iron gates, and there were servants coming and going, and stood at the gate was his wife, and she was wearing the most beautiful gown. And then he reached up to take off his fisherman's hat, and as he did so, he realised he was holding a beautiful top hat. And when he looked down, he was wearing the finest of suits, and his wife, she smiled and she was happy. Now, how long do you think she was happy for? A day? A week? A month? No, just 1 hour. And that's not because she was a bad woman, and it's not because she was a greedy woman. It's just that she had been thinking about what had just happened. And so she called Jack in and she said, "Jack, you caught a magic talking fish and he granted you a wish. And out of all of the things in the world that you could have wished for, you only wished for this house, when actually you could have wished for a beautiful palace. A beautiful palace with 2 great towers, with guards on the towers and guards at the gates, and for me to be queen and you to be king." And Jack said, "Well, I never thought of that." And his wife said, "Well, you get up tomorrow morning and you go out there and you catch that fish and you make that wish." So Jack got up in the morning and he put on his hat and he put on his coat and he went down to the beach, he climbed into his boat and he sailed out to sea. Well, when he got halfway out to sea, he picked up his net, and you can pick your net up with me, and after 3, ready? 1, 2, 3, swoosh! He threw that net out into the sea, and then he pulled it back in again. And when he pulled it back in, there, lying in the bottom of his boat, there was that big fish. Now, he reached back, that was a bit loud, sorry. He reached back and was about to hit the fish on the head with the hammer when the fish called out and said, "No, Jack, you don't want to do that. Today's your lucky day. You caught me, a magic talking fish. And if you spare my life, I'll grant you a wish. So Jack said, well, I wish that me and my wife lived in a beautiful palace. A beautiful palace with 2 great towers, with guards on the towers and guards at the gate, and for my wife to be queen and me to be king. That's right. And the fish said, well, if that's all you want, just put me back in the sea. So Jack picked up the fish, put him in the sea, and away it swam. And then he sailed back to the beach, climbed out of the boat, and walked along the beach towards his beautiful townhouse. And you know what? That townhouse was gone, and in its place was a beautiful palace with 2 big towers, with guards on the towers and guards at the gate, and there, standing in the robes of a queen, was his wife. And when he reached up to take off his fisherman's hat, his head felt heavy, and he lifted off what was a fisherman's hat and looked at a beautiful jewel-encrusted golden crown. And his wife, she smiled at him, and she was happy. You've done well, she said. You've done very well. But she wasn't happy for long. How long do you think she was happy for? A day? A week? A month? No, you guessed it, just 1 hour. And that wasn't because she was a bad woman. And that wasn't because she was a greedy woman. It was because she'd been thinking about what had just happened. And she called Jack and she said, Jack, you caught a magic talking fish. And out of all of the things in the whole wide world that you could have asked for, you only asked for this. When you could have asked for command of the fishes of the sea, of the animals of the land, the birds of the sky, and the very starry heavens themselves, and for you and me to be God. And Jack said, well, I never thought of that. And his wife said, well, tomorrow morning you get up and you catch that fish and you make that wish. So Jack got up the next morning, put on his hat, put on his coat, went down to the beach and climbed into his boat, and he sailed out to sea. Now he got halfway out to sea and he picked up his net, so you can pick your net up as well. With me, 1, 2, 3, swoosh! He threw it out. And when he pulled it back in again, there in the bottom of his boat lay that big fish. Now Jack reached back for the hammer and was just about to hit the fish and kill it when the fish called out and said, no, Jack, you don't want to do that. Today's your lucky day. You caught me a magic talking fish. And if you spare me my life, I'll grant you a wish. So Jack said, well, I wish that me and my wife had commands of the fishes of the sea, and the animals of the land, and the birds of the sky, and the very starry heavens themselves. And the fish said, well, if that's all you want, just put me back in the sea. So Jack picked up the fish, put it back into the sea, and watched it swim away. And then he sailed back to his beach. And he walked along the beach back towards his beautiful palace. But the palace wasn't there. It was gone. And in its place stood an old ramshackle shack, falling apart at the edges. And do you know what? If a strong wind had blown in the night, it would have knocked that old shack over. And standing at the door with her hands on her hips and no longer wearing a crown or the robes of a queen, but the rags that she'd been wearing those few days before, was his wife. And do you think she was happy? No, she wasn't happy. She looked at Jack and she said, Jack, what have you done? And Jack said, oh, wife, if only we'd have been happy with the things that we'd have asked for, we would have had them still. And we had one wish too many. And so they went back to their old life. And Jack waking up in the morning and opening the curtains and looking out of the window, and if there were some clouds in the sky, he'd say, can't go fishing today, too many clouds in the sky, and he'd roll over and go back to sleep. Or if he woke up in the morning and looked out the window and there were no clouds, he'd say, I can't go fishing today, there's no clouds in the sky, and he'd roll over and go back to sleep. And the thing is that if Jack and his wife didn't die, then they're living there to this day. And that is the story. Thank you very much, Tuffy. You might have noticed that the scenery behind me has changed very slightly, and there's a very good reason for that. You see, at the end of that last story, the wind suddenly changed direction and started to blow across the bottom of the microphone and make it a bit difficult for me to record. So I decided to move and change position slightly. I wasn't far away, I was just over there, but hopefully now you'll be able to hear me better. And whilst I was away, I got a bit thirsty, so I went to my bag to get a drink of water, and it was then that I realised, like a fool, I'd forgotten to bring my water bottle with me, but that didn't matter. I just went down to the sea's edge and I had dipped my hand in the water and had a mouthful of water. Oh, it was horrible. I'd forgotten just how horrible and salty the seawater tastes. But you know what? In that moment, I suddenly remembered a story that I once heard, and I thought, I might share that story with you now. And I'm going to. That's what my next story will be. You see, there was once a young boy. Unfortunately, his parents had died many years ago, so he was an orphan. But he lived with his grandmother, and the two of them were quite happy. And whilst they weren't exactly poor, they weren't exactly rich either. It turns out that they had just about enough of everything that they ever needed. Well, the day came when the old woman fell ill, and she thought she was going to die. And so she called the boy to her, and she told him that she hadn't got much to leave him. Very little, in fact. Just an old mill, an old grinding mill, the kind of thing that you might use to grind coffee with. But the thing was that this was no ordinary mill. This was a magic mill. And if you made a wish and said certain words, then the mill would magically grind for you whatever it was that you asked of it. And so she taught the boy those words, and I'm going to teach them to you now, how to make the mill work. And the words go like this: mill, mill, grind away, grind for me some whatever today. And then, having taught him how to make the mill work, the old woman taught him how to make the mill stop working. And these are the words that you use for that part of the spell. Mill, mill, you've done your stuff. You can now stop. I have enough. And then she said to the boy, you must keep this a secret, and promise me you will use the mill wisely and thus not attract attention to yourself. And the boy promised that he would use the mill wisely. And a day or two later, sadly, the old woman passed away, and the boy inherited his mill. Well, that evening, being hungry, he sat by the light of a candle, and he took out the mill and put it on the table, and he said the magic words, and you can say them with him. Mill, mill, grind away, grind for me some... I don't know, what do you think? What would you ask for if you had the special magic grinding mill? Pizza? Cake? Biscuits? Let's say pizza. Pepperoni. Although I wouldn't eat it myself, I'm vegetarian. Some pepperoni pizza. And so the mill started to grind away, and the boy couldn't believe his eyes, because there on the table before him was a beautifully formed and steaming hot pepperoni pizza. And he was so surprised and delighted he almost forgot to ask the mill to stop grinding. But at the last moment he turned to the mill and said the magic words, and you can say them with him. Mill, mill, you've done your stuff. You can now stop. I have enough. And the mill stopped, and the boy, he ate his pizza. Well, the boy was very happy with his grinding mill. And do you know what? Even though he could have wished for the world, he could have been rich beyond belief and had anything he wanted, he remembered the little promise that he'd made to his grandmother, and so he never asked for more than he needed. And time rolled by, as it does in stories. And one day he decided he would go travelling, and he packed up the mill in a bag on his back, and he locked the house, and he set off. And eventually he came to a port town there at the sea's edge, and he went down to the harbour where the tall ships that sail the seven seas were all moored up. And he thought to himself, if I could get work on board one of these ships, I could sail all around the world, see the whole world. And he was very excited, and so he set off to see if he could find passage. And it turned out that there was one captain in particular who was looking for a cabin boy of about his age, and so they agreed that he should come and work for him. And one morning, fair and bright, just when the tide was right, they set sail, and the boy set off on his adventure. Now, I don't know why, nobody's ever told me, but for some reason or other, the crew on board that ship took an instant disliking to that boy. I don't know what it was. Maybe he was too pretty. Maybe he was too ugly. Maybe they didn't like the clothes that he wore, or the way he carried himself as he went about his duties on board that ship. But I can tell you this, like him, they did not. And they made him the butt of all of their jokes, and they treated him roughly. And you know what? Worst of all, they never fed him as well as they could, or in fact, should have done. They tried to starve that poor boy. Now the boy, as best as he could, he took the jokes, he took the knocking about. But the food, that wasn't really a problem. Because at the end of the day, when he'd eaten what meagre offerings they'd given him, and he'd done his work, he'd go off to his little tiny cabin, and he'd sit down and he'd take his grinder out of the bag and place it in front of him, and he'd say those magic words. And whatever he'd asked for, whether it be bread or biscuits or whatever it was, would appear before him, and he would eat it. Now the rest of the shipmates, the crew, they became suspicious, because it didn't matter how much they starved him, that boy looked like he was eating healthily and well enough. So one day they decided that they would go and find out what was going on. And one of the sailors, towards the end of the day, he hid in the shadows near the boy's cabin. And when the boy came back, having finished all of his day's work, gone into the cabin and shut the door, the sailor crouched down and peeked through the keyhole, and he watched as the boy took out the magic grinding mill, put it on the table, and he said those magic words, and you can say them with him. Mill, mill, grind away, grind for me some bread today. And there, before the sailor's amazed eye, a loaf of bread appeared on the table in front of the boy, and the boy began to cut it and butter it and eat it. The sailor was so excited, he ran off to tell his shipmates. And when he told them what he had seen, they were so excited, they ran off to tell the captain. And when they told the captain demanded that the boy be brought to him immediately. And so they went and they fetched the boy. And the captain said to the boy, "You must bring me your special grind mill and show me how it's worked." But the boy said he wouldn't. He refused to. And the captain said, "I'm the captain. I've told you to do something, you have to do it. Go and get it." But the boy, no, he wasn't going to do it. Well, the captain lost his temper. He stood up, and in a rage he grabbed a hold of the boy around the waist, and he took him out of the cabin and down the steps onto the main deck, and along to the edge of the boat he went, and he stood at the rails, and he threw that boy in one mighty heave, whoosh, straight out of this story. My goodness, what a thing to do. I've no idea what became of him. And then the captain went back to his cabin and he sat down, and at just that moment the ship's cook came in with the captain's dinner and placed it in front of him. Steaming hot it was. And at exactly the same moment, the sailor who had been spying on the boy entered the cabin with the bag and took out of the bag the grinding mill and placed it on the table next to the captain. "Well," said the captain, "make it work." And he picked up his pepper pot and began to shake pepper over his food. And the sailor began to say the magic words, and you can say them with him. "Mill, mill, grind away. Grind for me some..." Oh, and he looked at the captain. "What shall we have?" he said. And the captain was thinking, "Gold, you fool, of course, gold." And he was just about to say the word gold when he reached out and picked up his salt cellar. And he realised that it was empty and he had no salt to put on his dinner. So instead of saying gold, he said, "Salt. Ask it for salt." And so the sailor said, "Salt. Grind for me some salt today." And immediately the salt cellar began to grind away some salt. And that salt poured out onto the table. Ha! The captain was delighted. What a thing to have. And he reached out and he took some salt and he sprinkled it over his dinner. And he picked up his fork and went to put it in his mouth, and he said, "Oh, I have enough salt now, you can make it stop." Boom. And the sailor said, make what stop? The little grinder, he said, make it stop. Well, how do I do that, said the sailor. I don't know why you're asking me, said the captain. I wasn't there when the boy was saying the magic words. I didn't hear him say any magic words to make it stop, said the sailor. What? Said the captain. Well, you didn't stay around to find out how to make it stop? No, said the sailor, I never thought of that. Oh, the captain realised that he was surrounded by fools. Well, he turned to the salt cellar and he said, enough, little salt cellar, stop. But the salt cellar didn't stop grinding. It just ground away, and the salt began to pour across the table in front of the captain's dinner plate. Stop, he said, stop, stop, stop. But the salt cellar would not stop. It kept pouring out salt, and the salt poured off of the edge of the table and down onto the cabin floor. Make it stop, said the captain to the sailor. I don't know how to, said the sailor. And the sailor started to shout at it, stop, 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 stop. But the little salt cellar wouldn't stop. It just kept grinding away, and the salt kept coming. Well, as the salt poured onto the cabin floor and between the floorboards and down onto the decks down below, the captain soon realised what kind of a predicament they were in if they didn't make that salt cellar stop. So he reached across and he grabbed a hold of the grinder to take it and throw it over the side of the ship. But what he didn't know and was about to find out was that once the little grinder started working, well, that was it. It was going nowhere. It just sat there and ground out salt. Well, the captain and the sailor began to shout and shout and shout at the grinder, but they couldn't make it stop. And soon the rest of the ship's company came to find out what the commotion was. And they stood at the cabin door and they watched the captain and the sailor shouting at the little grind mill. And they watched as the salt poured and poured, and as the salt filled up the cabin around the captain's ankles and up towards the captain's knees. And then they all began to shout, but it didn't matter because none of them knew the words to make it stop, and still the salt kept coming. And then suddenly there was a flash of light as a cutlass flew through the air and boom, smashed down on top of the little grind mill and cut it into two halves. And immediately the salt stopped coming, and everybody gave a great cheer. Hooray! And they turned to look at their hero, an older sailor who was looking quite proud of himself for the work he had done. And they gave him a cheer and a pat on the back. But then their faces changed because suddenly somebody said, look! And they turned and looked. And now on the table, instead of one grind mill, there were two grind mills, and both of them were churning out salt. Twice as much salt, twice as fast. The salt poured out of the mills and onto the table and into the cabin and through the floorboards and down into the decks below. And the ship began to fill up with salt, and everybody ran out onto the main deck, including the captain. And still the salt came and came, and slowly the ship began to grow lower and lower into the water. And it soon became apparent where this story was going to end, knowing that there was 3 weeks between them and the nearest land. And as the water began to pour, the seawater began to pour over the gun rails, some of the sailors jumped onto the side of the ship and dived into the water to escape. And the captain watched them, and in that moment he knew that he truly was surrounded by fools. But he also understood that out of all of those fools there on his ship, he was the biggest, because it was he himself that had thrown the boy over the side of the ship before first finding out how to make the little grind mill stop working. And with that, his last thought in his head as the ship sank down beneath the waves was, I probably deserve this. And the ship sank to the bottom of the sea, and there it stayed. Well, you might think that that was the end of the story, but of course it's not, because you see, nobody had actually told the little grind mill to stop grinding salt. And even though the whole of that ship by now has rotted away, to this very day, those little grind mills, those little salt cellars are down there somewhere at the bottom of the ocean, grinding and grinding and grinding away, churning salt out into our seas. And that's why I couldn't get a drink of water just now. So there. And I tell you what, if you've got a good diving suit, you might want to go out and explore the seas and see if you can find it and make it stop, and then there'd be plenty of drinking water out there for everybody. But that, if you think about it, is quite a big job, because there's a lot of sea out there. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my story. I did. Thank you. Well, I've got time probably for one more story. And this is a story that, I first heard the storyteller Chris Bostock tell this story. Chris from Newcastle up in the northeast of England, many years ago, and then it went completely out of my memory until I moved down here to Cornwall about 3 or 4 years ago, and I came across Mike O'Connor, the storyteller down here, and I heard him tell the story, and I found it in his little book as well, Cornish Folk Tales, and I started to tell it myself, and it quickly became one of my favourites. So I'd like to share that with you now, just to finish this session off. And it's a story about Davy, the fisherman. Now, Davy, he lived in Padstow, which is a little fishing town on the north coast of Cornwall. And he lived there many years ago, in a time when fishing was pretty much the only job that was going around these parts. And and he worked on his friend Jan had a boat, and he worked on Jan's boat. The thing is, he didn't like it. He didn't like fishing. There wasn't a thing about fishing that Davy liked. He hated getting up first thing in the morning and leaving his wife in bed and having to walk down to the quayside. And then he hated getting onto that little boat, because as soon as he stepped on the boat, he got seasick. And he didn't stop feeling properly seasick until he got off the boat at the end of the day. He hated the smell of the sea, on the salty sea air. He hated the wind in his hair, and he hated it when he got the salty sea water in the cuts of his fingers, and he had to go out fishing every single day, whether it was a beautiful day like today, or whether the wind was blowing a hoolie in a storm, and he just hated it. But there was nothing else to be done, and so that's what he did every day. Now one day, him and Jan, they'd set off to sea, and he'd spent the morning fixing the nets, and they were far out at sea, and they'd thrown the nets over the side, and they'd had their lunch, and they were pulling the nets back in and emptying the contents onto the deck of the ship, the boat. And when Davy looked down, he saw, amongst all of the fish flapping around on the deck of the boat there, he saw the most enormous and beautiful sea salmon he had seen in his whole life. And he looked at it, and the scales glistened with all the colours of the rainbow. It was a beautiful fish. And it lay there on the deck, looking up at Davy, as if to say, "Put me back in the sea, Davy. Put me back in the sea." Well, Davy looked over his shoulder to see where the skipper was, where Jan was, and he was up front doing something with the ropes, and so he quickly picked up that fish and he threw it over the side of the boat and watched it swim away. And then he heard Jan calling him. "I saw that, Davy," he said. "I saw you throwing that fish back over the sea. I don't pay you wages to throw my profits back into the sea. When we get back home today, you're finished, you're done with. I'll give you your pay, and you can go away, and you'll never step aboard my boat again." And that was bad news, really, because in these parts, in those days, if you lost your job on board a fishing boat, you never got a job on another fishing boat again anywhere in Cornwall. Didn't matter what had happened, word spread quickly, and that was that. You were done for. So Davy was in trouble. And he spent the rest of the day fishing. When he got back to Padstow, he helped put the fish on the quayside, and then climbed off the boat, and Jan gave him his money. He said, "There's your wages, now go on, be off here, never want to see your face again." And off he went. And he was walking back towards his little cottage, and he was thinking, how am I going to tell Mary, the wife? How am I going to tell? And there she is, expecting our first baby, and I've just gone and lost the only job going in these parts, and there's nothing else I can do. So as he walked through the town, he just decided to pop into the inn and have a little drink, just the one. You might think at this point this was going to turn into a story about Davy spending all the last of their money and getting drunk, but it wasn't. He just wanted to have a little moment to think about how he was going to tell his wife. And when he came out of the pub later on, it was starting to get a little bit dark, and he was working his way through the streets of Padstow back towards his cottage. And as he walked along, he walked towards an alleyway, and a strange man stepped out of that alleyway. A tall man in a very, very fine suit with a fine top hat resting on his head, tilted very slightly as if it was resting on something protruding from that stranger's head. And he had one of those lovely greasy moustaches that you could twirl and twist, you know the ones I mean, and a long goatee beard, and he looked like he'd been in the sun a little bit too much, if you ask me. And he had a fine suit jacket, and it stuck out at the back there as if something had been tucked up and wrapped up behind him. And his shoes, well, his shoes were more hoof than brogue, to be honest, but Davy didn't really notice this. And the stranger stepped out and he said, Davy, I understand that you've lost your job on Jan's fishing boat today. And Davy said, how did you know that? Oh, said the stranger, I know a lot of things. And I know that you've been sat in the pub down there trying to work out you're going to tell your wife Mary about it. And there she is expecting your first baby. How did you know that? Said Davy. Well, said the stranger, I told you, I know a lot of things. I know this, I can help you. How can you help me? Said Davy. Well, said the stranger, we might be able to do a little, I don't know, deal. What kind of a deal? Said Davy. Well, this kind of a deal. Take this bit of string, he said. This piece of string will help you in your troubled times. How would that piece of string help me? Said Davy. Well, said the stranger, clicking his fingers. When he clicked his fingers, there was a cow attached to the piece of string. Davy didn't quite know where the cow came from. How did you do that? He said. Oh, said the stranger, I can do many things. Take this cow, he said. The cow's name is Daisy. You look after the cow, and the cow will look after you. Great, said Davy. I'll take it. Oh, said the stranger, not so fast. Any fool can see that that is only half a deal. Oh, said Davy. What's the other half? The other half of the deal, my friend, is this. 1 year from today, I will come and find you. Wherever you are in the world, I will come and find you, and I'll ask you 3 questions. And if you can answer me those 3 questions correctly, then you can keep Daisy the cow, and you can carry on with your life doing whatever it is you are doing. However, if you fail and even answer one of those questions incorrectly, then I shall take your soul down to the pits of hell forever. And in that moment, Davy realised who it was that he was talking to. None other than the devil himself, Old Nick. I'll do it, he said. Good, said the devil. And he clicked his fingers again, and there was a contract. Sign here, he said, in blood. And he pricked Davy's finger, and Davy signed. And then the devil stamped his foot. There was a flash of light and a smell of sulphur. He was gone. And Davy took the string attached to Daisy's neck, and he went back to his wife's cottage. And he went into the front door, and Mary turned around and she said, "What's that?" He said, "That is a cow." I thought it was plainly obvious. "I can see it's a cow," she said, "but where did it come from?" "Oh, well, I bought it from somebody that I saw in town. I decided I've had enough of fishing," he said, "and it's time to take up, I don't know, farming." He decided that he wouldn't tell his wife that he had lost his job on board the boat, and he wouldn't tell his wife that he had met the devil and done a very strange deal. Now, the devil had told him that the cow was the best milking cow in the whole of Cornwall. It's just that I forgot to tell you that the devil had told him that. And he turned to his wife and he said, "This is the best milking cow in the whole of Cornwall." "Well, let's see," said his wife. And they took a jug and they milked that cow, and his wife took a glass of that milk and, "Davy," she said, "that is the richest, creamiest milk I've ever tasted. Here, have some." And she passed him the glass, and Davy, he took a sip of the milk. He said, "Wife, this is delicious milk." And Mary said to him, "This is what we're going to do." She was a quick thinker. "Now, you go off and you paint a sign with these words on it," and she told him what to say, "and I'm going to go and make some scones, and I'm going to get some jam from the cupboard, and I'm going to take that cream and I'm going to clot it. Tomorrow, we're going to open a cream tea shop." Now, for those of you that don't know what a cream tea is, it's a very, very popular delicacy down here in Cornwall. If you ever come to England, if you live far away, and you come to Cornwall, ask them for a cream tea in any of the cafes. It's everywhere. And it's basically a little bun. And you cut it in half and you spread jam onto the bottom half, and you spread cream on top of the jam, and then you eat it with a cup of tea. And it's a very, very delicious delicacy down here in Cornwall. So that's what Davy did. He painted a sign, and next morning they put that sign outside their little cottage, and the sign said, "Davy's Cream Tea Emporium." And it wasn't very long after the sign went outside when they had their first customer. One of the locals came in and ordered a cream tea, and he sat down, and they brought him a pot of tea and the scones and the jam and the cream, and they put the jam and the cream onto the scone, and that was nice, very nice. And when this person had finished their cream tea, they went off and they told some other people, and soon there were more customers coming in and having cream tea, the pot of tea and the cream scone. It was so tasty that they went off and told their friends, and the next day the little cottage was full of people coming to eat cream teas, to have cream teas. By the end of the week, they were so popular they had to look around and find a bigger premises, and they found a little shop with somewhere to live up above, and a bit of garden with some grass out the back, and they kept Daisy the cow in the garden, and they milked that cow every day and made their clotted cream, and they sold their cream teas, and very soon they had the best cream tea shop in the whole of Cornwall, and word spread far and wide, and people came from all over the place. They even came from as far away as Devon. And they all agreed these were the best cream teas to be had anywhere. And business grew and grew and grew. Well, as time went by, Davy suddenly started to remember the deal that he had done with the devil. And he thought, I better go and do some learning, because I'm not exactly the brightest spark in the fire. So whenever he could, he took himself off down to the library, and he got the children's encyclopedia, and he started to learn as much as he could, starting at the letter A and working his way through. Well, it was like 6 months after he'd met the devil when he started to look at the children's encyclopedia, and every day he went through and through and through, and those 6 months went by quite quickly. And now it was 1 year to the day since he had met the devil, and Davy was at the letter C, and he knew that he was in trouble. Well, it wasn't a very nice day. It was down here in Cornwall. We call it Mizzle, which is a day which is kind of like, well, it's very, very misty and foggy, and it's kind of like raining. But you'd look out the window and you'd think to yourself, it's not so bad that I couldn't pop down to the shop and buy a newspaper without my coat. So you'd set off down to the shop, but by the time you got there, you'd be soaked through to the skin. That's the kind of day it was. There were no customers. Well, that's not completely true. There was one customer. He'd come in early in the morning, just a tall stranger in a long raincoat with his hat pulled down over his eyes. He'd sat in the corner and he'd asked for a glass of water. And when he finished that glass of water, he asked for another glass of water. And so he went on throughout the day, one glass of water after the other. And Davy didn't mind, because he wasn't taking up much space. It's not like the place was full and they were busy. So he just kept bringing him one after another glasses of water. And you know what? As the day rolled by, Davy began to think, the devil's not made an appearance. Maybe the devil's forgotten. He's not going to come. What do you think? Does the devil forget? What do you think? Does the devil forget? No, of course not. The devil never forgets. And just as Davy was about to pull down the shutter and put up the close sign, the door burst open, and in came the devil, all of the disguise gone. his beard and his moustache and his horns and his tail flapping around behind him. Davy, he said, did you think I wasn't coming? Maybe you thought I'd forgotten. Well, here I am, and I hope you are ready to answer my questions. Are you ready to answer my questions? Yes, said Davy, I am. And just then, the stranger in the corner said, and that is your first question answered correctly. What? Said the devil. Who the devil is that? And Davy looked across. He said, well, he's just one of my customers. And that, said the stranger, is your second question answered correctly. Are you just going to stand there and let him do that? Said the devil. Yes, I am, said Davy. And that, said the stranger in the corner, is your third question answered correctly. Now be off with you, and let's never see you again. Oh, the devil, whose skin was already red, but he turned redder still. Hurrah! He stamped his foot. There was a flash of light, a smell of sulphur, and he was gone. The room fell into silence. And Davy didn't quite know what had just happened. And he looked across at the stranger and he said, thank you. Thank you for doing that. Who are you? And with that, the stranger got up and he walked across to Davy. And he pulled off his hat and he said, my friend, he said, I am the king of the salmon. And 1 year ago to this day, you saved me by putting me back in the sea. And I have come to return the favour. And with that, he walked out of the door and was gone. And Davy and his wife Mary, they lived the rest of their days happily making and selling cream teas in that little shop. Now that, my friends, is a true story. And if you don't believe me, you can go to Davy's Cream Tea Emporium. It's still there in Padstow to this day. And go in through the door, and there's one of those coconut mats with welcome written across it, just inside the door. And if you lift that mat up and look underneath it, you'll see the scorch mark where the devil stamped his foot. And that is that. So thank you. I hope you've enjoyed listening to my stories this afternoon. I've certainly enjoyed giving them to you, sharing them with you. And now, the thing is that just down there, well, somewhere, there's a little hat. And if you have enjoyed listening to my story, and you are able to, I would very much appreciate it if you'd drop a few digital coins into that little hat by way of a tip. And I would very much appreciate that. And I'm hoping to come back and share some more stories with you later. For the time being, where's my djembe? I've left it just over there. I'll go and fetch it. We'll have a little djembe out. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe and stay well. And I'll see you next time. Thank you very much. You can clap like that if you like. That is the end.
People, wherever you are, thank you for listening to that last storyteller. What an amazing performance. And if you enjoyed it, the hat, look just below the story. if you're on the website, and I do encourage you to go to the website, and you can put a little in the hat. If you're in Texas, I've got a Texas hat here. I've got this in Kerrville. You could drop $1 in, or $2. If you're in England, you can drop £1 in, or more. If you're in Canada, well, you could drop a few dollars in. And maybe if you're right up north in Lapland, you could drop a few kroner in, or maybe €1 or 2. It will be much appreciated. Thank you. Don't forget the hat and enjoy the stories.